The Vanishing of the Sodder Children. Have you ever stared into a flame, felt hypnotized by the way it dances, the way it whispers secrets you'll never understand? Imagine then, a night when those flames didn't just whisper, they screamed, they roared, swallowing everything they touched, leaving behind only ash, sorrow, and endless questions. This isn't just a story. It's a chilling journey into a real mystery, a haunting tale of 5 children who vanished without a trace. No bones, no bodies, just shadows and memories burned into history. In the quiet, rural town of Fayetteville, West Virginia, a single Christmas Eve forever scarred a family. The Sodder family, an ordinary, loving household, had their lives violently ripped apart on a night meant for joy and laughter. 5 children disappeared into thin air, their fates wrapped in flames, suspicion, and whispered conspiracies. Were they lost to a tragic accident, or were darker forces at play? As you listen, prepare yourself. Tonight, the flames of Fayetteville burn again. Their glow will light secrets hidden in the darkness, revealing truths that many wished would remain buried. Welcome to the chilling mystery of the Sodder children. Chapter 1. Silent Night, Burning Night, Fayetteville, West Virginia, December 24th, 1945. It was a crisp, clear Christmas Eve. The sky above Fayetteville was like velvet, scattered with stars, shimmering gently over houses lit by festive candles and string lights. The town, nestled comfortably in the Appalachian foothills, was peaceful, a quintessential image of American holiday cheer. In the modest home of the Sodder family, life unfolded warmly and quietly. George and Jennie Sodder were the proud parents. Of 10 children, their home always lively, always buzzing with youthful energy. Both had emigrated from Italy, seeking hope, stability, and prosperity in the new world. George was a hard-working man, respected by neighbors, known for his strong opinions and an outspoken stance against fascism. Jennie, soft-spoken and nurturing, was the gentle heart of their home, keeping their large family running smoothly. As twilight deepened into night, the family celebrated quietly, sharing laughter around their beautifully adorned Christmas tree, exchanging stories and making promises for the morning's festivities. The younger children, eyes bright with excitement, begged to stay up just a bit longer. George, ever indulgent during the holidays, agreed with a knowing smile, sharing an amused glance with Jennie. Fine, he chuckled warmly, but not too late. Santa's on his way and he'll pass right over this house if he sees children still awake. Little Martha, Louie, Jennie, Betty, and Maurice giggled, delighted by their father's teasing. John, Marion, George Jr., and the eldest son, Joe, had already retired to their rooms. Sylvia, the baby, slept peacefully in a crib next to her parents' bed. It was close to midnight when Jennie finally ushered the excited children to their rooms, reminding them gently to turn out all lights and lock the doors. She climbed the stairs slowly, her mother's heart full. She paused briefly at the doorway to glance back at her children, their faces alight with excitement for the dawn of Christmas Day. If only she knew it would be the last time she'd see them. Jennie woke abruptly. The sharp jangle of the telephone cut harshly into the peaceful silence of the night. She glanced at the clock, midnight. Startled and uneasy, she hurried downstairs to answer, her bare feet padding softly against the cool floorboards. "Hello?" she whispered, anxious not to wake the household. A strange female voice came crackling through, slurred laughter and clinking glasses audible in the background. "Wrong number," Jennie muttered, irritated and unsettled, hanging up the receiver. She noticed that the lights downstairs were still on, curtains drawn open. Unusual, she thought, assuming the children had forgotten her instructions in their excitement. Jennie quickly shut off the lights, drew the curtains closed, and ensured the front door was locked. She returned to bed, exhaustion tugging heavily at her eyelids. A loud thud startled her again, this time from the roof, as if something heavy had hit and rolled down. A fleeting worry crossed her mind, but she brushed it away. Perhaps an animal, a stray branch. Sleep reclaimed her swiftly, enveloping her again in restless dreams. It was around 1:30 a.m. when Jennie woke once more, this time to the acrid smell of smoke and the unmistakable crackling roar of flames devouring wood. Panic surged through her veins, jolting her fully awake. "George!" she screamed, shaking her husband desperately. "The house is on fire!" George shot up, eyes wide, pulse pounding. Smoke seeped into their room, choking and disorienting. Without hesitation, they grabbed baby Sylvia, rushing frantically into the hallway. Flames already climbed hungrily along the walls, smoke thickening rapidly. George yelled loudly, alerting his children in adjacent rooms. Marion, John, and George Jr. appeared quickly, coughing violently, eyes wide in terror. "Get outside now," George ordered, urgency ringing in his voice. "I'll get your brothers and sisters upstairs." George sprinted towards the staircase that led to the attic bedrooms where Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie, and Betty slept. His heart stopped at the sight. The stairway was completely engulfed in flames, the heat blistering his skin even at a distance. "Jennie! The stairs!" he shouted, voice raw with dread. "I can't get up." Frantically, George and Jennie herded there, escaping children out into the freezing night. Desperation clawed at George's heart. He ran outside, lunging towards the side of the house where he kept his ladder, but it was inexplicably missing. He dashed to his coal trucks, hoping to pull them closer to climb upon to reach the second floor. The engines wouldn't start, though they'd worked perfectly just the day before. He felt trapped, helpless, as the flames roared higher, consuming everything, his children's names echoing in his throat, choked by sobs and smoke. Neighbors, awakened by the blaze, began arriving, faces pale with shock, but strangely, the fire department was nowhere to be seen. They watched helplessly as the inferno consumed the Sodder home, wood cracking, windows exploding from the heat. Jennie sank to the ground, clutching Sylvia tightly, screams of grief lost in the roaring fire. Her children, her precious babies, were inside, and she couldn't save them. By dawn, the house was nothing but a smoldering pile of ashes. George stood, soot-streaked and hollow-eyed, staring at the ruin. But as the smoke cleared, a horrifying realization emerged. No bones, no remains, no trace of the 5 children lost in the fire. It was as if they'd simply vanished into thin air. The quiet town, once cloaked in festive cheer, awakened Christmas morning to an unimaginable tragedy. News spread rapidly, neighbors whispering behind trembling hands, faces pale and drawn with shock and disbelief. How could such a thing happen? How could an entire family be torn apart in mere hours? Fire Chief F.J. Maurice finally arrived on scene, around 8 a.m., far too late to salvage anything but ash and despair. His firemen, volunteers hastily assembled from across town, could only sift helplessly through the wreckage. They searched for any trace, any clue as to the fate of the missing children. Yet, bafflingly, they found nothing, no bones, no clothing, not even a fragment to indicate anyone had perished within the blazing inferno. George paced the grounds furiously, grief and anger warring within him. His mind raced with tormenting questions. Why hadn't the truck started? Who had moved the ladder? And above all, where were his children? "You must have missed something," he shouted, voice cracked and raw. "How can 5 children vanish like smoke? There must be something." Left, Chief Maurice, visibly uncomfortable, shifted uneasily. "We looked thoroughly, Mr. Sodder. The heat, it was intense. Perhaps it destroyed everything." But George, who had spent years working with fire and machinery, knew better. Even intense fires left bones behind, he argued. Something was horribly wrong. As George wrestled with despair, Jennie clung tightly to baby Sylvia, her mind unraveling with desperate thoughts. She recalled the strange phone call, the noise on the roof, the displaced ladder. Each detail now seemed terrifyingly significant. Had someone deliberately targeted her family? Days turned to weeks, and still no definitive answers emerged. The town buzzed with speculation and whispered conspiracies. Fayetteville was a small place. Secrets were few. Yet now it felt as though the town itself harbored something sinister. Grief transformed into determination. George and Jennie refused to accept the official conclusion that their children had perished in the fire. Driven by intuition and a parent's unyielding hope, they began their own investigation, turning every stone, following every clue, no matter how insignificant. As they dug deeper, troubling pieces emerged. A local bus driver claimed he had seen mysterious individuals tossing balls of fire at the Sodder home that Christmas Eve. Another witness spoke of a man watching intently from the side of the road as the flames consumed the house. Jennie's unease intensified, her memory of the strange phone call and noises magnified by these revelations. The family's anguish deepened when a woman at a nearby cafe swore she had served breakfast to the missing children, accompanied by adults she'd never seen before, the morning after the fire. These revelations tore fresh wounds into the hearts of George and Jennie, each clue bringing hope mingled with pain. Each day brought new sightings and stories, leading George into frantic, desperate chases across the region. One afternoon, a neighbor reported seeing the missing children in a car heading out of town, faces pressed against the glass, eyes wide with confusion. George's pursuit yielded nothing but disappointment, the vehicle disappearing as suddenly as it had appeared. Yet amidst the turmoil, troubling questions lingered about the authorities' indifference. Why had the fire department been so inexplicably late? Why were local police reluctant to thoroughly investigate the suspicious circumstances surrounding the fire? The Sodders sensed a sinister undercurrent, a dark secret that Fayetteville seemed eager to bury beneath layers of silence. The couple's growing frustration crystallized one chilling morning when George discovered something deeply disturbing. The house's phone lines had not been burned. They had been deliberately cut. Anger boiled in his veins. Someone had intended harm, isolating his family in their hour of need. Determined to raise awareness and force action, George and Jennie erected a massive billboard on their property, prominently displaying photographs of their lost children. Above the pictures, bold letters declared, "What was their fate? Kidnapped, murdered, or are they still alive?" The billboard loomed as a haunting monument along Route 16, confronting every passerby with a chilling, unanswered question. Travelers would slow, mouths agape, hearts heavy, reminded constantly of the unsolved tragedy. Fayetteville became synonymous with mystery, whispers about the vanished children now part of the town's very fabric. Years passed, yet George and Jennie persisted. They hired private investigators, posted rewards, and chased every lead that trickled in. No sighting was too obscure, no theory too strange. Their desperation grew alongside their hope, each clue a flickering light in the darkness. Then came a day that would haunt Jennie forever. Sorting through mail one afternoon, she found an envelope with no return address, postmarked from Kentucky. Her hands trembled violently as she opened it, and her heart stopped as she gazed at the photograph inside. Staring back at her was a young man with dark hair, familiar eyes gazing solemnly into the camera. On the back was scribbled a chilling note: Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie, Elil boys, A90132 or 35. Jennie collapsed onto a chair, breath stolen from her lungs. Could it really be Louis, her son, alive and grown? Or was this a cruel trick designed to break her already shattered heart? George quickly sent investigators to Kentucky, but again, trails ran cold. Still, that photograph became their most treasured, torturous possession, a reminder of hope and heartbreak intertwined. As decades wore on, George passed away, carrying the unbearable weight of uncertainty to his grave. Jennie continued the search alone, her days consumed by photographs, memories, and unanswered questions. She could not rest, could not find peace, haunted always by visions of her lost children. Eventually, Jennie too passed, never knowing the truth of what happened that terrible Christmas Eve. Yet, even in death, the Sodder family's haunting tragedy persisted, becoming folklore in Fayetteville. A story whispered fearfully in dim taverns, a cautionary tale of secrets hidden in the dark. Today, nothing remains of the Sodder home but memories and whispers, the billboard long gone. But locals still pause uneasily near the property, sensing something lingering, an echo of sorrow and mystery that refuses to fade. Visitors, drawn by curiosity, still roam the site, hearing phantom cries in the wind, glimpsing shadowy figures among the trees. And deep in the hearts of those who hear this story, one question burns endlessly. What really happened to the Sodder children? Chapter 2. Ashes and Questions. In the pale grey light of December 25th, 1945, Fayetteville awoke transformed. Gone were the echoes of joyful caroling, replaced by uneasy silence and the lingering scent of charred timber. The remains of the Sodder home lay smoldering, an ominous scar in the heart of the community, a grim testament to the night's mysterious tragedy. George Sodder stood motionless at the edge of what had been his family's sanctuary. His eyes burned with tears that refused to fall, hands clenched tightly, blackened by ash and despair. Beside him, Jennie rocked baby Sylvia slowly, murmuring softly to comfort the child, though no comfort reached her own heart. Chief Maurice walked slowly through the wreckage, shaking his head solemnly. His voice carried a strange uncertainty as he approached the grieving parents. "Mr. and Mrs. Sodder," he began hesitantly, removing his soot-covered helmet. "We searched thoroughly. The heat, it must have destroyed everything. There simply isn't any trace." George's voice was brittle with disbelief, cracking under unbearable weight. "That's impossible. Bones don't burn to nothing. Not like this." Jennie tightened her grip on Sylvia, stepping forward urgently. "Did you check thoroughly? Every corner, every spot? There must be something." Maurice glanced away uneasily, his expression unreadable. "Believe me, we did all we could." A heavy silence lingered between them, filled with unspoken accusations. The townspeople gathered nearby murmured quietly, their faces filled with sorrow and suspicion. Fayetteville had always been a close-knit community, yet something in the air felt different now, something darker. Days passed and grief deepened into suspicion. George's sleepless nights were haunted by unanswered questions. The missing ladder, the deliberately severed phone line, the trucks that mysteriously wouldn't start. Each troubling detail gnawed at his mind relentlessly. Seeking answers, George approached Sheriff Johnson, the respected yet enigmatic local lawman whose calm demeanor hid a mysterious reticence. "Sheriff," George implored urgently, "you must see this wasn't an accident. Someone set this fire. Someone wanted my children gone." Johnson regarded him carefully, eyes narrowed in cautious thought. "I understand your pain, George. Truly I do. But accusing folks without evidence isn't going to help. We have to face reality. It was a tragic accident. Nothing more." George's frustration boiled over, desperation overtaking restraint. "Then explain the ladder. The cut phone lines. How is this accidental?" Sheriff Johnson merely shook his head sympathetically, offering no answers. The encounter left George more unsettled, convinced something was being deliberately hidden. Determined to piece together the strange occurrences, George began a thorough examination of his property. He moved through the ruins methodically, each step stirring ash into the bitter winter air. With careful scrutiny, he discovered troubling details. Remnants of what appeared to be small rubber objects scattered around the perimeter, and peculiar footprints leading away from the property toward the woods. The discovery of the rubber objects unsettled George profoundly. Could these have been part of incendiary devices tossed onto the roof to ignite the fire? Jennie, upon hearing his theory, felt sickened. The noises she'd heard on the roof, the loud bang, the rolling sound, now took on sinister meaning. George, increasingly restless, expanded his search to the surrounding woods. He hoped, perhaps irrationally, to find evidence of his children's survival. Instead, he stumbled upon more unsettling clues. Discarded cigarette butts and footprints in the muddy ground suggested someone had lingered nearby, watching the tragedy unfold without intervening. The family's growing suspicions deepened further when a local telephone company repairman confirmed their worst fears. The phone line to the Sodder home hadn't simply burned, it had been deliberately severed, cleanly and intentionally cut. The chilling revelation left no doubt. Someone had planned this tragedy meticulously. Fueled by anger and sorrow, George tirelessly questioned neighbors, seeking answers in their hesitant eyes. Most sympathized, offering condolences, yet few provided meaningful clues. Whispers circled about threats George had received due to his vocal anti-fascist stance, pointing toward resentment among certain Italian-American circles in the area. George remembered vividly a strange encounter weeks prior when a man angrily confronted him about his political views, ending ominously with the chilling threat that his house would go up in smoke. The family's trauma intensified as Fayetteville's initial outpouring of support began to shift subtly toward indifference and discomfort. Townspeople avoided eye contact, muttering vague sympathies as they hurried by. Jennie sensed something was terribly wrong. Her maternal instincts screamed warnings louder with each passing day. Desperate for answers, George hired a private investigator named C.C. Tinsley, whose reputation for thoroughness and discretion preceded him. Tinsley quickly uncovered disturbing irregularities. One shocking revelation was that Fire Chief Maurice had quietly claimed he found a human heart amid the ashes, but inexplicably buried it in a metal box at the scene. Upon excavation, Tinsley discovered not a heart, but rather a beef liver, untouched by fire, clearly planted to mislead the family and discourage their inquiries. Horror and confusion overtook the Sodders, their trust shattered further. Why would Maurice fabricate evidence? Who wanted them silenced and why? The case grew more enigmatic as Tinsley unveiled additional unsettling details. Witnesses revealed seeing the missing Sodder children alive, being escorted out of Fayetteville on the night of the fire. One witness, a waitress from a nearby diner, swore under oath she served breakfast to the missing children and two unknown adults the morning after the fire. Her detailed description matched perfectly with the Sodder children, right down to their clothing. This revelation was both hopeful and devastating. The idea their children might be alive brought a painful joy, yet the implications of kidnapping chilled George and Jennie to the bone. Could someone truly have taken their beloved children, staging the horrific fire as a diversion? More perplexing still was the bizarre behavior of local authorities. Why had they ignored these vital witness testimonies, dismissing them as mere confusion or imagination? Why had the town's officials actively discouraged investigation, subtly steering conversations away from uncomfortable truths? As the months unfolded, George and Jennie grew increasingly isolated, their desperate quest for truth setting them apart from a community eager to move forward, willing to forget. Yet the Sodders, bound by love and grief, refused to let their children become mere memories lost in Fayetteville's darkest night. They decided to fight openly, erecting an enormous billboard on their property, displaying their missing children's photographs and promising substantial rewards for information. The billboard stood defiantly, a stark reminder to Fayetteville and the world beyond that 5 children were gone, yet no truth had been found, and in the shadows, unseen forces watched, biding their time. Secrets lurked quietly, waiting patiently, beneath the surface, guarded by those determined to ensure Fayetteville's darkest mystery would remain forever unsolved. Chapter 3: Shadows from the Past. The past is never truly gone. It waits, patient and silent, casting long shadows that stretch endlessly through our lives. George Sodder knew this truth all too well. Each sleepless night since the fire, his mind spiraled backward, sifting memories for answers, searching desperately for clues he might have missed in those years preceding the tragedy. George Sodder had arrived in America as Giorgio Soddu, a bright-eyed 13-year-old immigrant eager to build a better life. Like many Italians of his generation, he left behind a homeland fractured by poverty and political upheaval. But unlike many others who silently blended into their new surroundings, George carried with him fierce convictions, beliefs shaped by witnessing the oppressive regime of Mussolini firsthand. In Fayetteville, George built a successful trucking business, known widely for his integrity, strong work ethic, and vocal anti-fascist sentiments. This outspoken nature often stirred controversy in the predominantly Italian-American community, where support for Mussolini and the fascist regime lingered quietly in pockets of hushed approval. George had made powerful enemies, though at the time he paid little heed to their whispered threats and subtle warnings. But now, as he stood in the ruins of his life, George couldn't ignore the past any longer. It was a cold afternoon in late January when memories of a particular incident resurfaced with haunting clarity. Just weeks before the fire, an insurance salesman named Thomas Hill had visited the Sodder home. Hill, a gaunt man with calculating eyes, aggressively attempted to sell life insurance to George, who promptly refused, dismissing the proposal as unnecessary. Angered by George's dismissal, Hill's tone turned threatening. His eyes narrowed, voice dripping venomous intensity. "Your goddamn house will go up in smoke," he hissed, gesturing toward the children playing in the yard. "And your children will be destroyed, all because of your dirty anti-Mussolini talk." By the time, George shrugged off the threat as meaningless, the bluster of an angry man unable to close a sale. Now, standing in the ruins of his home, he wondered bitterly how wrong he had been. He cursed his foolish pride, his blindness to the very real danger posed by those around him. With the troubling memory fresh in his mind, George sought out Sheriff Johnson once more, determined to confront him directly with the insurance salesman's chilling threat. The sheriff listened impassively, offering vague assurances but no real commitment to investigation. George left the sheriff's office feeling more isolated and desperate than ever. As George navigated Fayetteville's icy streets, another memory tugged insistently at his mind. A stranger who had appeared at the house weeks before the fire, inquiring, oddly, about wiring in the basement. The man had claimed to be searching for work, but something about his probing gaze and evasive demeanor unsettled George deeply. The stranger had lingered far longer than necessary, inspecting areas unrelated to his stated purpose. When George questioned him, the man abruptly departed, vanishing as mysteriously as he had appeared. Now, that strange visit resonated sinisterly. Had this been the moment when the sabotage of the Sodder home was carefully planned? Driven by paranoia and pain, George began quietly investigating individuals he had encountered, neighbors, workers, even casual acquaintances. Each person he questioned reacted similarly. Startled surprise followed swiftly by guarded silence. Fayetteville had closed ranks against him, shielding secrets he desperately needed to uncover. Late one evening, as snow drifted softly through, Fayetteville, George received an anonymous telephone call that sent chills down his spine. A gravelly voice, disguised and distant, spoke cryptically. "Your children are alive. Stop searching, or they'll suffer more." The line went dead abruptly, leaving George trembling violently, heart pounding with a renewed mix of hope and dread. Who had threatened him? Who held his children hostage, tormenting them and him alike? George's anguish deepened, but alongside it grew a fierce determination. He would never stop searching, never surrender. Jennie, meanwhile, faced her own battles, haunted daily by the mystery. Her nights were spent in anguished prayer, while daylight, hours brought endless examinations of photographs, clothing, and mementos left behind by her missing children. Each object was a cruel reminder of their absence, each echo of laughter now hollow and haunting. Her mother's intuition screamed relentlessly that her children had not perished. They were alive somewhere, held captive, afraid, and waiting desperately for rescue. With the assistance of private investigator C.C. Tinsley, Jennie began uncovering unsettling accounts of unfamiliar faces in Fayetteville weeks prior to the tragedy. Several witnesses described strangers loitering near the Sodder property, taking careful note of routines and habits. One witness vividly recalled a dark sedan parked repeatedly near the home in the days leading up to Christmas, its occupants watching silently from shadowed windows. Jennie's unease intensified upon discovering the testimony of a local hotel clerk. The clerk claimed that a group of mysterious, well-dressed men had checked into the Fayetteville Inn shortly before Christmas, speaking quietly in Italian and frequently inquiring about George Sodder and his family. These strangers abruptly checked out on Christmas morning, mere hours after the fire had devastated the Sodder home. George and Jennie realized their search was no longer simply about finding their children. It had become about unraveling a dark web of political resentment, carefully orchestrated sabotage, and sinister plots stretching far beyond Fayetteville's quiet streets. Late one night, George received a visit from C.C. Tinsley. The investigator's expression was grim, shadows heavy beneath tired eyes. "George," Tinsley began slowly, "this goes deeper than we thought. I found something disturbing." "What is it?" George urged, desperation plain in his voice. Tinsley hesitated, his voice lowering to a whisper. "There's evidence that influential figures, possibly local officials, have deliberately interfered with the investigation. Evidence was suppressed, threats made, witnesses silenced. Someone powerful doesn't want your children found." George's fists clenched involuntarily, rage and despair warring within him. "Why?" he choked out, voice breaking. "Why would anyone do this?" Tinsley shook his head sadly, his voice heavy with sorrow. "Because, George, the truth about your children could expose secrets powerful people want buried forever. Your family was caught in something bigger, something deadly." George's heart sank into darkness, the enormity of what they faced nearly overwhelming. Yet amid his anguish, one truth crystallized sharply. He would never surrender, never stop, fighting until his children were safe in his arms again. The weeks that followed were marked by profound tension and mounting paranoia. Fayetteville became a maze of whispers, half-truths, and fearful silence. Neighbors averted their gazes, doors closed hastily at the Sodders' approach, and townspeople hurried away, unwilling or unable to confront the family's anguish. George and Jennie clung fiercely to each new fragment of information, no matter how obscure. Driven by relentless hope, they scoured newspapers, libraries, and distant police records, desperate for clues. They received numerous leads, each tip intensifying their emotional torment. Reports flooded in from distant towns. Witnesses claimed sightings of the Sodder children in Kentucky, Missouri, and as far away as Florida. Yet each pursuit ended the same way: frustration, heartache, and silence. Despite constant disappointment, their resolve only deepened. George and Jennie were determined never to give up, vowing to spend their lives unearthing every hidden truth. For them, forgetting was impossible. Their hearts remained chained to that horrific night, endlessly replaying unanswered questions. The weight of suspicion settled heavily on the town's Italian-American community. George's outspoken anti-fascist sentiments had created powerful enemies, and Fayetteville was home to individuals still quietly sympathetic to Mussolini's regime. Dark whispers emerged, implicating a hidden network within the community. Men loyal to extremist beliefs, men who saw George Sodder as a traitor deserving of punishment. One evening, a knock at the door brought another strange visitor into the Sodders' troubled lives. A shadowy figure stood at their doorstep, collar turned up against the winter wind, face partially hidden beneath a fedora. "Mr. Sodder," the stranger murmured urgently, glancing around nervously. "Can we talk?" George led the man inside, noticing immediately his nervous demeanor. The visitor introduced himself simply as Joseph, an Italian-American who had lived quietly in Fayetteville for years. Joseph hesitated before speaking, his voice trembling slightly. "I need to tell you something. Something I've carried too long." "What is it?" George asked, heart racing with anticipation and dread. Joseph swallowed hard, his eyes haunted. "I overheard a conversation shortly before the fire. Some men, they were discussing your family. Powerful people, angry about your stance against Mussolini. They spoke about teaching you a lesson you'd never forget, something that would silence you forever." George felt his blood run cold. "Did you recognize these men? Who were they?" Joseph shook his head, fear flashing across his face. "I can't say. But know this, what happened wasn't an accident. It was revenge. They took your children, George, and the fire. It was a cover." Jennie, listening nearby, pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, tears spilling freely down her cheeks. George's fists clenched involuntarily, rage and despair mixing in a potent wave of anguish. Joseph turned quickly, glancing out the window fearfully. "I've said too much already. Be careful who you trust, Mr. Sodder. They're still watching." He disappeared swiftly into the night, leaving the couple shaken to their core. That encounter intensified their resolve. George realized he could no longer trust anyone in Fayetteville. A town once beloved, now shrouded in darkness and betrayal. Determined to fight openly, the Sodders erected an enormous, defiant billboard on their property, prominently featuring the photographs of their missing children beneath a stark message. What was their fate? Kidnapped? Murdered? Or are they still alive? This powerful declaration, visible to everyone traveling along Route 16, became a daily confrontation of Fayetteville's collective conscience. It spoke clearly to both the innocent and guilty, refusing to let the tragedy fade quietly into history. Months turned into years, but George and Jennie's tireless search endured. Their grief evolved into a steely determination. They traveled across the country, personally investigating sightings, always holding on to hope. But each journey ended in frustration, leaving them emotionally battered yet more determined to continue. Their home became a shrine to their lost children, photographs, frozen in happier times, clothing neatly folded, waiting impossibly for their return. The Sodders' lives were defined by this unending limbo, haunted by questions and possibilities forever out of reach. Finally, a chilling piece of evidence appeared, arriving in the form of a mysterious envelope postmarked from Kentucky. Jennie opened it, hands shaking uncontrollably. Inside was a photograph, a young man, dark-haired and intense, staring directly into the camera. Jennie's heart stopped. She recognized instantly the familiar features, the eyes she had gazed into so lovingly when he was just a child. It was unmistakably Louis Sodder, grown but unmistakable. The back of the photograph bore a cryptic message scrawled hastily in pencil. Louis Sodder, I love Brother Frankie. Elil Boys, A90132 or 35. Jennie collapsed into a chair, the photograph clutched desperately in her trembling hands. Could this truly be Louis? And if so, was he still alive, perhaps desperately trying to reach out? George, heart racing, dispatched a private investigator immediately to Kentucky. But the investigator returned, empty-handed, the lead dissolving into the same maddening silence that plagued them at every turn. Yet Jennie cherished that photograph deeply, placing it reverently beside her bed, gazing nightly at her lost son's face. It became both solace and torment, proof that their children might yet live, somewhere far beyond reach. Fayetteville, meanwhile, grew weary of the persistent reminder of tragedy. The billboard, once a potent symbol, now provoked discomfort, whispers of annoyance, even resentment among locals eager to bury the past. The Sodders' pain, so publicly displayed, disrupted the fragile normalcy the town desperately sought to reclaim. Yet George and Jennie refused to remove their message, understanding it was their only power, the power to ensure their children's memory would never fade, their disappearance never forgotten. In the silent spaces between hope and despair, George wrestled nightly with a dark understanding. Powerful secrets protected by powerful men hid behind Fayetteville's quiet facade, buried deeply enough that even time might not uncover them. Still, he swore silently each night, gazing toward the distant stars. His lost children might also see. He would never rest, never stop searching, never surrender to despair. And in the shadows, watching always, those who had stolen the children remained vigilant. They hoped George and Jennie's resolve would someday break, their spirits eventually crushed beneath years of unanswered questions. But the conspirators underestimated one crucial thing: the power of parental love, stronger than silence, stronger than secrets, a flame that never dies, no matter how long it burns unanswered. Chapter 4. Echoes and Apparitions. Years slipped by quietly, each new day bringing a painful repetition of the last. Fayetteville slowly settled back into a semblance of normalcy, desperately attempting to forget the tragedy of Christmas Eve, 1945. Yet beneath this fragile peace, whispers persisted. Sightings and strange rumors kept the story of the Sodder children hauntingly alive, refusing to be buried. George and Jennie Sodder's grief evolved, becoming a quiet, constant ache, like an unending shadow trailing their every step. They had meticulously followed countless leads, each promising hope but delivering only disappointment. Yet each new tip, each reported sighting, rekindled their determination, however fleeting. One dreary autumn afternoon, George received a frantic phone call from a woman in Charleston, West Virginia. Her voice shook with urgency as she described a chilling encounter. "I saw your children. I swear it was them. They were with two strange men speaking Italian. I called out, but they hurried away, disappearing into the crowd." George and Jennie rushed to Charleston, hearts racing with desperate hope. For days they canvassed streets, distributed photos, and questioned shopkeepers. But, as always, the trail vanished into silence, leaving them empty-handed and heartbroken once more. Despite each crushing setback, sightings continued sporadically. In towns scattered across America, from Tampa to Detroit, strangers claimed encounters with children closely resembling the Sodders. Reports of dark-haired youths with fearful eyes, accompanied always by unfamiliar adults, haunted the couple relentlessly. Back in Fayetteville, strange occurrences began to unfold around the Sodder property itself. Though their home remained only ashes and rubble, neighbors whispered uneasily of ghostly apparitions glimpsed near the charred remains at night. Figures, faint and wavering, would reportedly appear briefly before vanishing without trace. Jennie, skeptical yet desperate, began to spend nights at the site, her heart aching for any sign, supernatural or otherwise. On several chilly evenings, as mist curled softly through the trees, she felt a sudden, inexplicable warmth beside her, a sensation like a child's small hand pressed gently into hers, reassuring yet impossibly distant. One night, she clearly heard a whispered voice drifting softly through the darkness. "Mama," it called faintly, barely audible but unmistakably real. Jennie spun around frantically, eyes wide, pulse hammering, but saw nothing except shadows and starlight. These haunting experiences, inexplicable yet deeply comforting, strengthened her resolve further. Jennie believed these apparitions were signals from her lost children, messages of hope, urging her never to abandon the search. Meanwhile, George tirelessly pursued rational explanations, combing through every police file, newspaper report, and rumor. Each new clue led him deeper into dark territory, uncovering unsettling accounts of abductions, human trafficking, and political vengeance. Yet tangible evidence remained maddeningly elusive, deliberately obscured by hidden forces determined to keep the truth buried. Private investigator C.C. Tinsley continued his quiet investigations, uncovering disturbing layers beneath Fayetteville's peaceful surface. He found evidence that crucial reports had vanished mysteriously from police archives, witness testimonies altered or conveniently misplaced. The fire department's delayed response, the strange reluctance of local officials, each detail spoke to a deeper conspiracy, frightening in scope and implication. George's frustration reached new heights when Tinsley revealed that Chief Maurice himself had privately confessed doubts about the fire's origin. Yet Maurice refused public comment, fearful of repercussions. The implications chilled George deeply. If even the fire chief feared speaking openly, how powerful were the forces aligned against them? Despite these chilling revelations, the Sodders persisted openly in their search, courageously defying silence and intimidation. The billboard on Route 16, weathered but defiant, continued to confront each passerby with a question that refused to be forgotten. Then, on a bitterly cold winter night, another strange visitor appeared at their door. A middle-aged woman, bundled in layers, eyes filled with sadness, introduced herself simply as Margaret. "I must speak with you privately," she whispered urgently, her gaze darting nervously behind her. Inside, Margaret sat, visibly trembling. "I worked for years at an orphanage in New York. One night, 2 boys were brought in secretly, dark-haired, frightened, speaking little English. They matched your son's descriptions exactly. I tried asking questions but was quickly fired, threatened if I spoke out." Jennie clutched her chest, eyes wide with hope and fear. "Do you know what happened to them?" Margaret shook her head regretfully. "They were moved quickly, vanished again overnight. But I knew I had to tell you. Your children, they were alive, at least for a time." George, deeply shaken, grasped Margaret's hands tightly. "Thank you," he whispered hoarsely. "You've given us hope and strength." Margaret vanished into the night as mysteriously as she'd arrived, leaving behind only another painful thread of hope. Yet each new clue was a double-edged sword, simultaneously comforting and torturous, keeping the Sodders' grief painfully fresh. As years turned into decades, the sightings grew less frequent, but the haunting experiences at the Sodder property intensified. Witnesses increasingly reported strange lights flickering in the woods, shadowy figures drifting silently through the trees, and phantom children's laughter echoing faintly through Fayetteville's dark nights. One evening, a local teenager wandered near the ruins on a dare. Terrified, he later swore he'd clearly seen 5 children standing hand in hand at the property's edge, watching him silently before dissolving into darkness. News spread rapidly, deepening Fayetteville's eerie legends and reinforcing the town's uneasy relationship with its most tragic mystery. George and Jennie, aging but never broken, continued living under the shadow of loss. Their lives remained forever suspended between grief and hope, haunted by echoes of vanished children whose fates remained unknown. Yet their love endured fiercely, strengthened through tragedy. Hand in hand each evening, they walked silently around the property, whispering prayers, calling softly into the darkness, their hearts forever open, forever waiting. And deep in Fayetteville's shadows, someone watched, ensuring truths remained buried, silence maintained, and secrets protected at any cost. As the years pressed onward, Fayetteville gradually became synonymous with mystery and unexplained phenomena, quietly infamous as a place forever touched by sorrow and unanswered questions. Residents, initially dismissive of the supernatural claims, eventually came to acknowledge the strange occurrences surrounding the Sodder property. Parents warned their children away from the area after dark, cautioning that restless spirits roamed the grounds, unable to find peace. In the Sodder home, George meticulously documented each sighting and report, creating vast files filled with witness testimonies, photographs, and letters. Each document represented hope, yet also frustration, an endless cycle of searching, finding, and losing again. For every lead pursued, two more sprang up, overwhelming and unmanageable, pushing him to emotional and physical exhaustion. Jennie, meanwhile, found herself drawn more frequently to the ruins of their former home, spending hours alone among the ashes. She spoke softly to the empty air, begging her lost children to return or to give some clear sign they still lived. And though tangible proof never arrived, subtle signs comforted her weary heart. Gentle breezes brushing her cheek, faint whispers carried softly on the wind. Inexplicable warmth felt in the coldest nights. On one particular evening, as twilight settled gently over the town, Jennie heard a child's voice clearly call her name. Startled and hopeful, she rushed toward the sound, eyes searching desperately in the fading light. Standing by the scorched foundations, she saw fleetingly the image of young Betty smiling warmly at her, arms outstretched as if welcoming an embrace. Jennie fell to her knees, tears streaming freely down her face, overwhelmed by grief and gratitude. Though the vision lasted mere seconds, it reignited her resolve, confirming in her heart that her children were reaching out, urging her to continue fighting, to never surrender hope. Yet even as Jennie drew strength from these ghostly visitations, the strain took its toll. Friends and neighbors began whispering concern, suggesting gently that the Sodders' obsession bordered dangerously close to madness. Fayetteville moved forward, slowly forgetting its saddest chapter. Yet the Sodders remained trapped, unable and unwilling to leave behind the mystery of their lost children. But while most of Fayetteville turned away, George and Jennie found allies in the unlikeliest of places. A small group of residents quietly supported their search, anonymously sharing rumors and potential leads. One elderly woman named Agnes, a longtime Fayetteville resident, discreetly approached Jennie one Sunday after church. "I've hesitated too long," Agnes confessed quietly, eyes glistening. "Many years ago I saw your children with strange men outside of town. The men were well-dressed, speaking quietly in Italian. I tried reporting this, but the sheriff told me to forget it." Jennie's heart quickened, frustration mingling with fresh anger. "Why would the sheriff silence you?" she asked, voice trembling. Agnes shook her head slowly, her eyes filled with sadness. "Because, Mrs. Sodder, powerful people here had reasons to bury the truth. Your family's tragedy revealed secrets Fayetteville wished forgotten." As Agnes walked away, Jennie felt another piece fall painfully into place. The bitter truth became clearer. Fayetteville's silence was not passive indifference. It was active concealment, a deliberate attempt to erase the memory of her children. Yet George and Jennie refused to be silenced. Together they traveled tirelessly, tracking obscure leads across multiple states, driven by the faintest hope. Each sighting brought renewed vigor. Each disappointment brought unbearable pain. Yet they pressed onward relentlessly, bound by an unyielding love. Late one night, an elderly man appeared at their door, leaning heavily on a cane, face deeply lined. He introduced himself as Albert, a former police officer from a distant town. "I have something you must see," he murmured gently, handing George an old photograph. George's breath caught painfully as he stared at the faded image. It showed 5 children standing near a car, clearly uneasy, flanked by 2 stern men. Though blurred and aged, George instantly recognized his missing children's features: Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie, and Betty, all visibly frightened, yet undeniably alive. "Where was this taken?" George whispered urgently, voice shaking uncontrollably. Albert sighed deeply. "In Florida years ago. I was ordered to ignore it, bury it, threatened into silence. But my conscience won't let me rest. I had to tell you." George embraced Albert tightly, overcome with emotion. Jennie wept openly, holding the precious photograph tightly, heart racing. Though decades had passed, this tangible evidence reignited their hope, proof their children had survived beyond that terrible night. Yet, as always, pursuing the Florida lead ended in frustration. Records vanished mysteriously, witnesses disappeared or refused to speak, and the Sodders found themselves once again facing silence and shadows. But this time, their determination only deepened, steeling their hearts for the battles still ahead. Years later, George Sodder passed away quietly, carrying unanswered questions and endless grief. But Jennie persisted alone, refusing ever to abandon hope, living daily with the unshakable belief that somewhere, somehow, her beloved children still lived. Until her final days, she clutched the photograph from Florida, her greatest treasure and deepest torment. Fayetteville's whispers never ceased, the town forever haunted by unanswered questions, restless spirits, and the tragic mystery of the vanished Sodder children. Chapter 5. The Haunting of Fayetteville. In Fayetteville, memories were like specters, lingering, elusive, impossible to grasp fully, yet equally impossible to escape. The tragic disappearance of the Sodder children became the town's greatest ghost story, whispered fearfully in quiet conversations, perpetually shrouded in shadowy suspicion. For George and Jennie Sodder, however, these ghosts were all too real. Each dawn brought fresh agony, each night deeper torment. Their relentless search for answers transformed into obsession, isolating them further from a community eager to bury its darkest secrets. The billboard on Route 16 continued defiantly, proclaiming their unanswered question, a stark, painful reminder Fayetteville could never fully ignore. Yet beneath its imposing shadow, resentment simmered quietly among townspeople exhausted by the persistent confrontation with tragedy. As the years wore on, strange occurrences around the Sodder property intensified dramatically, becoming nearly impossible to ignore or dismiss. Neighbors frequently reported eerie lights floating silently over the grounds, hovering ominously before dissolving into the night. Others heard disembodied children's laughter drifting through the darkness, gentle yet profoundly unsettling even. Fayetteville's most skeptical residents eventually conceded the undeniable strangeness enveloping the site. Children spoke fearfully of ghostly figures glimpsed from school buses passing by, spectral forms gazing silently at them from the ruins. Jennie, increasingly withdrawn, spent hours at the property, feeling inexplicable presences around her. One gray, misty afternoon, while softly whispering prayers for her lost children, she clearly heard a child's voice echo faintly. "Mama." The word hung gently in the air, unmistakable and heart-wrenching. Jennie spun around frantically, searching desperately. But only silence and shadows remained, deepening her aching loneliness and strengthening her resolve. George, meanwhile, grappled continually with the town's resistance and secrecy. He frequently visited local authorities, urging further investigations into unsettling discoveries made by private investigators, but each time his pleas fell on indifferent ears, silenced by bureaucratic evasion and subtle threats. One morning, an envelope arrived anonymously at the Sodder residence, marked only with their names in crude handwriting. Inside, George found a brief, chilling note: "Stop your search, or you'll lose more than just your children." Fear surged within him, not fear for himself, but profound dread for Jennie and their surviving children. The threat was clear, ominous, yet George refused to surrender. He immediately brought the note to Sheriff Johnson, who took it dismissively, placing it carelessly into a drawer with scarcely concealed disinterest. "It's probably just a prank," the sheriff said dismissively, avoiding eye contact. George stared, shocked and disgusted, realizing definitively that no help would ever come from local authorities. Fayetteville's silence was not merely passive, it was deliberate, calculated, a concerted effort to bury the truth at all costs. Determined, George quietly expanded his efforts beyond Fayetteville, seeking outside assistance. He contacted prominent investigative journalists and national newspapers, hoping broader media attention would pierce through Fayetteville's carefully guarded silence. Yet each inquiry was swiftly and mysteriously shut down or ignored, leaving George increasingly certain that powerful hidden forces worked actively against him. One rainy afternoon, another strange visitor appeared at their doorstep, this time a man dressed impeccably, speaking softly with a faint European accent. He identified himself simply as Carlo, claiming vague connections to George's distant past in Italy. "I must warn you, Mr. Sodder," Carlo spoke carefully, glancing around uneasily. "You're chasing secrets dangerous to know. Your children, your family, got caught in something beyond your understanding. Let them go, before more harm comes." George eyed Carlo sharply, voice steady yet strained. "I can't abandon my children. If you know something, tell me." Carlo shook his head, slowly, sadness evident. "Believe me, it's safer to remain ignorant. There are powers you cannot fight, people who have destroyed lives to protect their secrets. I'm sorry, but your search must end now." Without another word, Carlo vanished into the storm, leaving George shaken and profoundly disturbed. Yet surrender was unthinkable. The threat, instead of weakening him, fueled a new fire of defiance, strengthening his commitment to uncovering the truth. Meanwhile, Jennie's emotional condition deteriorated noticeably. Friends watched helplessly as grief, isolation, and frustration took an enormous toll. Increasingly, she spoke openly about the apparitions around the property, describing vivid, comforting visions of her lost children visiting frequently at dusk, appearing briefly to smile sadly before fading away. Concerned neighbors whispered that grief had finally driven Jennie mad. But those closest to her knew otherwise. These visions, real or imagined, sustained her, offering the only solace in a life defined by loss and unanswered questions. Late one night, as Jennie sat quietly near the ruins, she felt an unmistakable presence approach gently behind her. Turning slowly, she gasped. Standing clearly in the moonlight was Maurice, her lost son, smiling softly at her, eyes filled with love and sorrow. "Find us, Mama," he whispered gently, voice trembling with emotion. "We're still waiting." Jennie reached desperately toward him, tears blurring her vision, but the apparition dissolved swiftly into darkness. Alone once more, she sobbed uncontrollably, heart aching unbearably. Yet Maurice's haunting visitation was clear. Her children needed her, somewhere, somehow still waiting for rescue. That night, Jennie resolved fiercely never to stop fighting, never to let fear or grief silence her. Fayetteville could hide truths, bury secrets, but it could never erase her unwavering love, a bond stronger than silence, deeper than shadows. George, deeply moved by Jennie's experiences, redoubled his efforts. They traveled tirelessly together, chasing every clue, pressing forward despite threats, exhaustion, and despair. Their defiant billboard remained Fayetteville's silent accusation, confronting passers-by daily, refusing to let their children's disappearance fade quietly into oblivion. Yet even amid their courageous battle, George and Jennie sensed constantly they were watched by hidden eyes, shadowy figures waiting patiently in Fayetteville's darkest corners. Those who had orchestrated their tragedy remained vigilant, determined to preserve secrets hidden beneath the small town's quiet surface. And still, the whispered echoes of lost children drifted nightly through Fayetteville's shadows. Restless, spirits seeking peace, truth, and justice, waiting patiently for someone brave enough to listen and finally set them free. As the years progressed, the hauntings around the Sodder property intensified dramatically, drawing widespread curiosity and unease. Fayetteville residents reported increasingly frequent paranormal events. Shadowy apparitions appearing nightly, strange lights moving silently through the trees, and children's voices softly whispering from nowhere. Word quickly spread beyond Fayetteville, attracting researchers and curiosity seekers eager to investigate the now infamous site. Paranormal investigators arrived from neighboring states, bringing equipment intended to capture evidence of the supernatural phenomena plaguing the area. Though initially skeptical, many left profoundly shaken, convinced something genuinely inexplicable inhabited the ruins. One investigative group, after a weekend spent carefully monitoring the site, reported capturing a chilling audio recording. A child's voice whispering clearly, "We're still here. Help us." The recording circulated widely, reigniting public interest and media coverage. Fayetteville, uncomfortable beneath renewed scrutiny, withdrew further into guarded silence. George and Jennie, though wary of sensationalism, welcomed the attention cautiously. They hoped renewed public interest might finally pressure authorities into action or coax someone knowledgeable to speak openly, finally breaking Fayetteville's stubborn silence. The strategy seemed effective, at least initially. Another anonymous letter soon arrived, different from previous threats. Instead, this note appeared earnest, remorseful. "I was there that night. I saw your children taken. Fear kept me silent, but guilt haunts me constantly. They were alive when they left Fayetteville. Don't stop looking." This revelation profoundly impacted George and Jennie, reigniting their determination, validating their lifelong insistence their children survived. It also deepened their anger toward those who had allowed silence and fear to bury the truth for so long. Yet the anonymous tip yielded no further clues. Investigators found no identifiable fingerprints, and handwriting analysis proved inconclusive. The note, while deeply moving, remained yet another painful dead end. Increasingly, however, George and Jennie began receiving unusual nighttime phone calls, silent calls punctuated by quiet breathing, faint whispers in languages unknown to them, and occasionally distant chilling laughter. The Sodders endured these tormenting calls, interpreting them as attempts by their unseen adversaries to break their resolve. But the harassments only strengthened their courage. They spoke openly in interviews, revealing publicly the harassment they faced, hoping transparency would dissuade those tormenting them. Yet instead, threats intensified, manifesting as anonymous notes, vandalized vehicles, and disturbing acts designed specifically to intimidate and frighten. Determined to confront the hidden forces directly, George publicly challenged Fayetteville's authorities during a town hall meeting, accusing officials openly of complicity and cover-ups. His impassioned speech stunned the assembled crowd, How can any of you rest peacefully, knowing you've buried your own neighbor's children under silence? If you know the truth, speak it. End this nightmare, not just for my family, but for the soul of this town. The confrontation ignited. Immediate chaos, anger and shame rippling visibly across faces in the audience. Several residents abruptly left, unable or unwilling to face George's accusations. Yet others lingered silently, visibly moved, eyes filled with guilt and sadness. Days after his powerful speech, George received another late-night visitor. This time, Sheriff Johnson himself, appearing visibly shaken, aged beyond his years. The sheriff spoke carefully, voice heavy with guilt and exhaustion. "George, it's time you understand. Powerful men silenced me years ago. Men whose influence extends far beyond Fayetteville. Your family stumbled into something bigger than any of us. Your children paid the price, and I can never undo my part in hiding that truth." George's voice shook with barely contained rage. "Tell me everything, Sheriff. My children deserve justice, and you owe us that." Johnson sighed deeply, sinking heavily into a chair. "That night wasn't accidental. Your home was targeted deliberately. Your outspoken stance against fascism stirred dangerous enemies, men connected to powerful networks determined to silence dissent. Your children were taken to send a clear, chilling message." George stepped closer, voice trembling. "Where are they now? Tell me, Sheriff." Sheriff Johnson shook his head sadly. "I don't know, George, and frankly no one here does. They were moved repeatedly. Identities changed. Those behind it ensured the trail vanished completely." "I'm sorry." The sheriff stood slowly, eyes glistening. "I came tonight because my conscience demands it. Be careful. The people behind this are still watching. Your bravery endangers powerful secrets. They'll stop at nothing to keep the truth hidden." Sheriff Johnson left quietly, leaving George shaken deeply, yet more determined than ever. This chilling conversation affirmed conclusively what George had long suspected. Fayetteville wasn't simply hiding tragedy, it concealed deliberate, calculated evil. In the aftermath, George and Jennie redoubled efforts to attract national attention, hoping pressure from outside Fayetteville might finally penetrate its secrecy. They shared Sheriff Johnson's revelations publicly, describing openly the intimidation, threats, and their belief in a powerful conspiracy. Media attention surged again briefly, yet quickly dwindled, silenced mysteriously. Editors and journalists later admitted quietly to George that pressure from powerful figures forced them to abandon further coverage, leaving the Sodders isolated once more. Meanwhile, paranormal events at the property escalated dramatically, terrifying even hardened skeptics. Witnesses reported shadowy figures frequently appearing at night, visibly distressed and pleading silently toward the Sodders' home. Unexplainable lights and sounds intensified, drawing national curiosity and unease. Researchers documented chilling electronic voice phenomena, clear recordings of children's voices repeatedly pleading, "Don't forget us. Find us." These haunting messages brought emotional comfort to George and Jennie, interpreting them as signs their children still existed, somewhere desperately reaching out. Ultimately, Fayetteville's profound secrecy and stubborn silence proved impenetrable, protected by powerful forces that ensured truths remained hidden, mysteries unresolved. But George and Jennie, strengthened by decades of grief and love, vowed never to surrender. Their billboard, defiant and unyielding, remained a permanent monument to their lost children, confronting Fayetteville daily with a question impossible to erase or silence. And so, the haunting continued, both literal and metaphorical. Fayetteville, forever trapped beneath shadows of unanswered questions, relentless memories, and whispered echoes of 5 children stolen in the night, waiting endlessly to be found. Chapter 6. Trails of Smoke. The quest for truth is a perilous journey. Each clue, each rumor, each sighting offered George and Jennie Sodder faint hope, but also new heartbreak. Every hopeful moment seemed to vanish like smoke, trails dissipating quickly into frustrating silence. Years stretched painfully forward, yet the Sodders persisted tirelessly, refusing to let their children's memory fade quietly. Despite repeated intimidation and threats, they widened their search ambitiously, following elusive trails across the country. Rumors whispered of organized criminal networks, shadowy groups responsible for trafficking children across state lines, often to distant places where new identities obscured their origins entirely. The possibility their beloved children had fallen victim to such networks terrified George and Jennie deeply, yet propelled their resolve further. One lead directed them to Florida, to a town where numerous witnesses reported seeing children resembling the Sodders' lost ones. Upon arrival, George and Jennie canvassed the streets relentlessly, handing out photographs, asking locals cautiously about suspicious strangers who had lived there decades earlier. Their presence quickly drew attention, particularly from older residents who clearly remembered a small group of Italian-speaking men and frightened children living briefly on the outskirts of town years before. But further questioning led nowhere. Residents became silent abruptly, eyes suddenly fearful, refusing further cooperation. George quickly realized powerful forces had reached even here, silencing potential witnesses before they could speak openly. Yet undeterred, he gathered every scrap of evidence, however fragmented, desperately hoping these clues would eventually illuminate the truth. Traveling north, they pursued another lead to a quiet suburb in Michigan. Locals recalled vividly a strange family living discreetly there, children closely resembling the Sodder children, watched constantly by mysterious, foreign-speaking guardians. George and Jennie's hearts leaped painfully with hope, convinced these children were theirs, now grown but unmistakable. But this trail, too, ended abruptly. Authorities claimed the family had vanished quietly one night years before, leaving no trace. Neighbors grew suddenly forgetful, unwilling to speak further, clearly frightened by unseen threats. Each dead end intensified their suspicions. This was no mere local crime, but part of a larger conspiracy spanning multiple states, orchestrated by powerful figures determined to silence all witnesses permanently. Private investigator C.C. Tinsley confirmed these chilling suspicions during a late-night meeting at a secluded diner. "George, Jennie," Tinsley spoke gravely, "I've discovered something deeply troubling. The trails you're following aren't random. There's a network, a powerful organization capable of moving children swiftly, changing identities seamlessly. They erase every trace, every witness silenced or intimidated." Jennie's voice trembled. "Why would anyone do this?" Tinsley sighed. "Deeply, revenge, power, control. Your outspoken views against Mussolini angered dangerous, influential groups deeply embedded in immigrant communities. Your family became targets, your children pawns in their terrible game." George clenched his fists tightly, voice raw with anguish. "But where are they now, Tinsley? Do we have any chance of finding them?" Tinsley shook his head slowly. "They're hidden, protected by money and influence. Each time we get close, trails vanish, records disappear. But we can't give up. Eventually they'll make a mistake." As George and Jennie departed the diner into the rainy night, they felt eyes upon them, unseen yet watchful. The chilling sensation reinforced their understanding that powerful enemies tracked their every move, ready to intervene should they uncover too much. Yet surrender was unthinkable. Driven by unwavering love, they pressed onward courageously, expanding their search beyond national borders, following faint trails into Canada and Mexico, speaking with contacts cautiously and quietly. In Toronto, a journalist discreetly approached George after a community meeting. "I know about your children," he whispered urgently, glancing nervously around. They were brought through Canada briefly. My sources confirm a powerful international network connected to fascist sympathizers and organized crime. They targeted your family deliberately. The journalist provided documentation, notes, photographs, witness statements. But within days, the journalist himself vanished mysteriously, his apartment ransacked, evidence stolen. George understood the terrible cost of speaking openly. The journalist had risked everything, only to disappear silently, another victim of hidden powers. Each city visited offered similar fragments of hope, followed quickly by threats and silence. Yet, despite frustration and exhaustion, George and Jennie collected vital information piecemeal, slowly illuminating a frightening picture. A vast, powerful conspiracy dedicated to erasing inconvenient truths permanently. Back in Fayetteville, the billboard remained a haunting accusation, prompting increasing hostility from townspeople who resented constant reminders of unresolved tragedy. George and Jennie, however, refused to relent. Their presence became uncomfortable, yet profoundly necessary. A constant challenge Fayetteville could neither silence nor ignore completely. Their growing archive of clues became extensive, carefully hidden and meticulously protected. They documented every threat, preserved every lead, awaiting an opportunity to finally expose Fayetteville's darkest secrets fully and publicly. One night, however, George discovered their carefully organized files had been disturbed, key documents removed discreetly. Fear gripped him. Their unseen adversaries had penetrated their home, violating their sanctuary deliberately to intimidate and silence them. But intimidation failed utterly. The violation fueled George's anger, deepening his determination further. He publicly revealed details of the intrusion, appealing openly to national media, accusing powerful figures directly of obstructing justice, kidnapping, and murder. Media attention surged again briefly, forcing authorities into uncomfortable responses. Fayetteville officials publicly dismissed George's accusations as paranoid fantasies, deflecting criticism through carefully orchestrated public relations strategies. Yet privately, threats intensified dramatically, now aimed directly at George and Jennie's surviving children, warning explicitly that their continued search endangered remaining family members. Though terrified, the Sodders refused to surrender, understanding clearly the depth of corruption and evil they opposed. Yet each night, their fear grew alongside resolve, aware powerful enemies observed silently, awaiting any sign of weakness or surrender. And still, trails continued fading like smoke, their children's whereabouts obscured behind layers of secrecy, fear, and silence. But George and Jennie pressed onward bravely, undeterred by threats or danger, driven by unyielding hope that somewhere, beyond shadows and lies, their beloved children waited patiently to be found. With each passing year, the Sodders' pursuit of truth became increasingly perilous. Their repeated efforts to uncover hidden networks triggered swift retaliation from unseen adversaries. Threats escalated alarmingly, manifesting through sinister letters, anonymous calls, and disturbing incidents clearly intended to frighten them into silence. One dark winter night, a brick crashed violently through their living room window, scattering shards of glass across the floor. Tied to it was a brief, ominous note scrawled hastily, "Last warning, stop your search or your family will suffer again." Jennie trembled as she read the message, tears welling uncontrollably. Yet despite their terror, neither she nor George considered surrender. If anything, the violence only deepened their determination, fueling their relentless drive to confront Fayetteville's dark secrets openly. Increasingly convinced local authorities actively obstructed justice, George approached higher-level officials beyond Fayetteville, desperately hoping external intervention might break the conspiracy's stranglehold. Yet each attempt ended similarly, Initial sympathy and interest from external officials quickly faded into silence, thwarted mysteriously by powerful influences. Desperation pushed George to appeal directly to prominent figures, senators, governors, even the FBI. Letters pleaded urgently for investigations, describing clearly the intimidating silence, missing evidence, and clear obstruction faced repeatedly. Most letters went unanswered, but occasionally responses arrived, expressing polite disinterest or guarded refusal to intervene further. Their isolation deepened profoundly. Though friends offered quiet sympathy, fear kept them from publicly supporting the Sodders openly. The couple fought bravely but largely alone, increasingly isolated from a community eager to forget its painful past. Meanwhile, their surviving children suffered silently, feeling profoundly their parents' relentless obsession. Each experienced harassment and intimidation, receiving subtle threats against their safety. Yet all stood loyally behind George and Jennie, determined equally to uncover truth and justice, unwilling to abandon their missing siblings to forgotten shadows. Private investigator C.C. Tinsley continued working quietly in the background, providing George with valuable yet alarming insights. In secret meetings, he revealed deeply troubling discoveries about the scope and power of the conspiracy. "I've tracked money trails, George," Tinsley explained grimly during one meeting. Funds flowed discreetly through legitimate businesses, front companies masking true purposes. The network stretches widely. Criminal organizations, political sympathizers, corrupt officials. They profit immensely from child trafficking, forced adoptions, even blackmail. George shook his head, devastated. "My children, what happened to them, Tinsley? Are they alive? Where did these trails lead you?" Tinsley sighed deeply, hesitant yet honest. "Several leads suggest your children survived for years. Identities changed repeatedly, moved frequently across multiple states. Powerful. Protectors ensure trails vanish swiftly, hiding truths beneath silence, money, and fear." Heartbroken yet determined, George pressed forward, carefully gathering evidence, hoping eventually enough documentation might expose Fayetteville's darkest secrets decisively. The Sodders' persistence provoked a new wave of anonymous threats, warnings increasing in explicit violence. One chilling note, arriving attached to their car windshield, warned clearly, "Keep pushing and you'll lose everyone you love. The truth you seek will cost lives." Fear surged again, yet surrender was inconceivable. Each threat, intended to silence, instead fueled their courage, reinforcing their unwavering resolve to fight openly and fearlessly. A particularly promising lead emerged suddenly, guiding them to a small town in Ohio. Locals vividly recalled a strange group arriving decades earlier, several frightened children accompanied by mysterious foreign-speaking adults. George and Jennie raced there immediately, interviewing residents, collecting detailed eyewitness accounts. But as before, their presence drew immediate aggressive responses. Within days, several cooperative witnesses withdrew abruptly, terrified into silence. One night, while reviewing notes in their hotel, George answered a sudden, urgent knock on the door, finding a terrified local woman standing outside. "Leave. Immediately," she whispered urgently, glancing fearfully behind her. "They know you're here. They'll hurt you if you stay. Please, for your family's sake, just go." Before George could question further, she vanished swiftly into the darkness. Deeply shaken, yet defiant, the Sodders chose to leave cautiously, preserving collected evidence while protecting witnesses now clearly endangered by powerful forces. Back in Fayetteville, their billboard continued haunting the community, challenging openly the conspiracy's calculated silence. Residents, exhausted by decades of controversy and attention, begged the Sodders privately to remove it. Yet George and Jennie refused adamantly, understanding its profound symbolic power as their only true weapon against Fayetteville's secrecy. Late one evening, another disturbing visitor arrived, a woman claiming vague connections to Fayetteville's Italian-American community. Visibly frightened, she whispered urgently, revealing shocking details about a secret meeting held years before the fire. "They plotted openly against your family, George. Angry men connected to Mussolini's loyalists vowed to silence you permanently. They specifically discussed taking your children to ensure your suffering lasted forever." George listened numbly, heart shattering further, understanding finally the depth of evil confronting them. His outspokenness had endangered his family profoundly, yet guilt only hardened his resolve further. Despite every threat and disappointment, George and Jennie maintained tireless hope, believing desperately that somewhere their children survived, waiting patiently for rescue. Their love remained stronger than fear, their courage unbreakable despite constant danger. Fayetteville, however, endured quietly beneath shadows of guilt and unresolved pain, forever haunted by the whispered tragedy of 5 children stolen silently. In the night, a mystery fiercely guarded yet never fully silenced. Chapter 7. Fragments and Photographs. Decades of relentless searching had taken their toll on George and Jennie Sodder. Physically exhausted, emotionally battered yet unbroken, they continued to cling fiercely to fragments of hope. Fayetteville had grown weary of their presence, but the Sodders remained, stubbornly confronting the town with their unresolved tragedy. Then one chilly afternoon, a plain white envelope arrived in the mail, postmarked from a distant city, Louisville, Kentucky. Jennie opened it cautiously, heart pounding with inexplicable anticipation. Inside lay a single photograph, slightly faded yet shockingly clear. Jennie's hands trembled violently, eyes flooding instantly with tears. The photograph showed a young man, dark-haired, eyes familiar yet haunted. Despite the passing years, Jennie recognized him immediately, Louis Sodder, her missing son, now grown. She turned the photograph over slowly, discovering words scrawled hastily in pen. "Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie, lil boys, A901, 32, or 35. Jennie's heart thundered painfully, joy and anguish warring fiercely within her. Could this truly be Louis, her precious son? And if so, was he alive and desperately reaching out after decades of silence? She immediately shared the photograph with George, who stared numbly, emotions churning uncontrollably. Though skeptical, after years of disappointments, something about the photo felt genuine, authenticity undeniable yet tormenting. Determined to verify its origins, George immediately dispatched trusted private investigators to Louisville, instructing them to uncover any possible lead, no matter how minor. Days stretched painfully, anxiety building relentlessly as they awaited news. The investigators eventually reported troubling findings. The postmark led to a dead end, traced to a mailbox with no surveillance, impossible to identify sender details. Yet despite limited clues, investigators confirmed something vital. The photograph itself was genuinely recent, not an old or altered image. The revelation brought George and Jennie profound joy mixed with unbearable sorrow. Louis had clearly survived the fire, yet remained trapped somewhere unknown, hidden and silenced by powerful forces who had abducted him decades earlier. This photograph became the Sodders' most precious possession, simultaneously comforting and haunting them. Jennie placed it reverently by her bedside, gazing nightly into the familiar eyes, begging silently for answers that remained stubbornly elusive. Soon afterward, a second envelope arrived, again anonymous, again cryptic. Inside were torn fragments of paper, each containing fragments of handwriting barely legible. Children safe, hidden, fear retaliation. Forgive me. George painstakingly pieced fragments together, desperate for clarity, yet finding only partial messages, brief glimpses into truths deliberately obscured by fear and secrecy. The sender's identity remained utterly unknown, but the message, however incomplete, was heartbreakingly clear. Someone knew definitively their children had survived and remained hidden intentionally. Despite emotional turmoil, these new revelations renewed George and Jennie's resolve fiercely. Ignoring relentless threats, they intensified their public appeals dramatically, pleading openly through media interviews for the anonymous sender to reach out directly, promising confidentiality and protection. But the sender remained silent, unwilling or unable to risk further exposure. Fayetteville, meanwhile, responded harshly, residents openly hostile, accusing the Sodders of prolonging painful memories unnecessarily. Yet George and Jennie endured criticism courageously, understanding clearly their persistence posed real threats to powerful, unseen enemies determined to maintain silence. In private, George's health declined noticeably under stress and relentless anxiety. Jennie, too, struggled emotionally, yet they drew strength constantly from their surviving children, who steadfastly supported their parents' tireless quest for truth. Increasingly isolated, George began carefully preserving evidence, sensing intuitively he might soon pass responsibility fully to Jennie and their children. His carefully documented files became increasingly vital, an archive of truths painstakingly uncovered, yet deliberately hidden by powerful conspirators. Late one evening, another stranger appeared quietly at their door, a man clearly frightened, yet driven by conscience. Identifying himself only as Anthony, he admitted vaguely to former connections within Fayetteville's Italian-American community, where whispers persisted regarding the Sodder children's fate. "Your children survived," Anthony confirmed cautiously. "They were taken deliberately, identities changed repeatedly. They feared for their lives and yours. If they ever revealed themselves, powerful figures promised severe punishment. Silence was their only protection." Jennie wept silently, heartbreaking anew at the confirmation of her deepest fears. George listened intently, understanding definitively the tragedy they faced, a conspiracy so vast, so ruthless, it silenced even their own children. Anthony departed quickly into darkness, leaving the Sodders profoundly shaken yet determined anew. They understood definitively their children survived, trapped behind silence and fear, unable to return openly, desperate yet powerless to reunite. That night, George and Jennie made solemn promises to each other. They would never stop fighting, never abandon their children, never accept silence as inevitable. Their love endured fiercely, stronger than threats, conspiracies, and shadows. Yet, beneath their quiet resolve, Fayetteville watched uneasily, aware each passing year drew closer toward inevitable confrontation. The Sodders' relentless pursuit threatened to expose hidden evils deeply embedded within Fayetteville's carefully maintained facade. George and Jennie had already endured decades of torment, threats, and isolation. But now, armed with powerful new evidence, photographs, fragments, testimonies, they approached finally a chance at true justice, no matter how dangerous their journey had become. And somewhere, beyond shadows and secrecy, their children still waited silently, reaching desperately yet quietly through fragments, photographs, and haunting echoes, urging their parents forward bravely toward truths still hidden, waiting finally to be uncovered. Renewed public attention surrounding the mysterious photograph reignited widespread media interest in the Sodder case. Reporters from national newspapers arrived in Fayetteville once more, hoping finally to uncover the long-hidden truths lurking behind decades of silence. Initially hopeful, George and Jennie cooperated fully, sharing openly their extensive evidence, carefully preserved letters, cryptic notes, witness testimonies, and, above all, the recent photograph of Louis. Their heartfelt appeals drew broad sympathy nationwide, prompting renewed demands for an official investigation into Fayetteville's troubling past. Yet the public attention swiftly attracted fierce opposition. Fayetteville officials publicly dismissed the Sodders' evidence as unreliable, attributing sightings and photographs to mistaken identities, cruel hoaxes, or simple misunderstandings. A carefully orchestrated media campaign portrayed George and Jennie as tragic yet deluded parents trapped in relentless denial. Privately, however, the Sodders continued receiving threats from hidden adversaries determined to suppress the truth. Anonymous notes warned chillingly that further publicity endangered surviving family members directly. Tires were slashed, vehicles vandalized, their homes subjected to nightly harassment, sinister reminders of the power wielded silently against them. But rather than silence George and Jennie, intimidation deepened their courage profoundly. They understood clearly their persistent defiance threatened powerful, hidden interests willing to do anything to bury truths permanently. Meanwhile, local residents increasingly distanced themselves from the Sodders, fearing public association would expose them to similar threats. Friends visited cautiously, offering private encouragement yet unwilling to speak openly. Fayetteville had become a prison of silence, trapping the entire community beneath shadows of fear, guilt, and unresolved tragedy. Despite isolation, George and Jennie pressed forward relentlessly. With the assistance of private investigators, they painstakingly traced every fragment of evidence, each clue bringing new understanding yet greater frustration. Each lead consistently vanished abruptly, obscured deliberately by powerful influences, ensuring silence remained absolute. One particularly promising tip emerged unexpectedly. A woman living quietly in Detroit contacted Jennie directly, claiming she'd attended school briefly decades earlier, with children closely resembling the Sodders' lost ones. Jennie traveled immediately, hopeful yet cautious, to interview the woman personally. In Detroit, the woman, named Elena, described clearly the strange classmates who spoke little English, kept strictly separated from other children. Elena recalled vividly their frightened expressions, guarded constantly by stern adults refusing interaction with others. Jennie's heart broke anew as Elena described one child specifically. Young Martha, unmistakably identified by unique features Jennie remembered painfully from decades past. Elena's memories were vivid, yet deeply troubling, confirming again her children's forced separation, loneliness, and fear. But further investigation into Detroit ended abruptly, again blocked by powerful obstacles. Witnesses suddenly refused cooperation, records mysteriously vanished, authorities obstructed openly. Patterns of obstruction Jennie recognized immediately from years of similar experiences. Despite painful disappointment, each fragment strengthened their resolve profoundly. Each testimony, photograph, letter became precious evidence meticulously documented, awaiting an opportunity to confront Fayetteville's conspiracy openly and decisively. Yet emotional and physical strain gradually weakened George profoundly. Age, anxiety, relentless stress finally exacted heavy tolls. His health deteriorated visibly, though he fought courageously to maintain strength for Jennie, whose unwavering love sustained him continually. Increasingly, George spent long nights, organizing their vast archive of evidence carefully, understanding intuitively he might soon pass responsibility entirely to Jennie and their children. Each document was meticulously annotated, carefully preserved, ensuring future generations could continue confronting Fayetteville's deliberate silence bravely. Late one evening, George quietly confided privately to Jennie, voice trembling gently, with emotion, "If something happens to me, promise you'll never stop fighting. Our children deserve justice. Fayetteville's secrets must never remain buried. Promise me, Jennie." Jennie embraced George tearfully, promising solemnly never to abandon their quest for truth, no matter personal cost or sacrifice. Weeks later, George passed peacefully in his sleep, leaving behind profound grief, yet powerful inspiration. Fayetteville breathed briefly in guilty relief. mistakenly believing George's death would finally silence uncomfortable truths permanently. But Jennie persisted bravely, fulfilling faithfully her solemn promise to George. She continued publicly confronting Fayetteville, speaking openly to media, revealing carefully documented evidence previously withheld, directly challenging the conspiracy's ruthless silence, courageously and defiantly. Paranormal events around. The property intensified dramatically after George's passing, deeply troubling skeptical investigators and local residents alike. Many interpreted the activity as George's restless spirit defiantly confronting Fayetteville's silence, demanding finally justice, truth, and resolution. Jennie drew emotional comfort from these experiences, believing sincerely George's presence endured spiritually, guiding and strengthening her continued fight. She persisted courageously despite isolation, threats, harassment, determined never to surrender or accept Fayetteville's deliberate silence as inevitable. Ultimately, however, truths remained elusive, carefully protected beneath layers of fear, money, and influence. Yet Jennie's unwavering bravery became Fayetteville's most powerful accusation, confronting daily a conspiracy that hoped desperately to forget its darkest secrets permanently. And somewhere beyond shadows and secrecy, fragments and photographs, her children still waited silently, patiently enduring decades of separation, hoping profoundly their parents' relentless courage might someday reunite them finally. Chapter 8. Lost but not forgotten. Years turned relentlessly into decades, but Fayetteville remained forever haunted by the tragic Christmas Eve of 1945. Time softened memories but never erased the profound scars left by the disappearance of the 5 Sodder children: Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie, and Betty. Their names echoed endlessly in whispered conversations, silent prayers, and restless dreams, becoming part of Fayetteville's very identity. After George Sodder's passing, Jennie continued her courageous fight, alone. Her strength, though quiet, resonated profoundly through the community, challenging Fayetteville's stubborn silence every day. The billboard on Route 16 remained defiantly intact, weathered yet powerful, confronting travelers daily with questions that remained painfully unanswered. Jennie's surviving children rallied continually around their mother, deeply inspired by her unwavering determination. They actively supported her public appeals, carefully managing the vast archive of evidence George meticulously compiled. Each document represented profound grief yet powerful hope, a testament to decades of relentless searching and love, stronger than loss. Yet, as Jennie grew older, her health gradually weakened. Despite failing strength, she refused passionately to surrender, continuing to appeal openly for witnesses to step forward courageously, finally breaking Fayetteville's silence. Permanently, her emotional speeches moved hearts nationwide, attracting sympathetic media attention, yet always confronting silent resistance from hidden adversaries determined to bury truths completely. Her remaining children worried privately about Jennie's declining health but respected profoundly her stubborn determination never to surrender. They supported her tirelessly, promising solemnly to continue fighting courageously should she no longer be able. Finally, late one winter evening, Jennie quietly summoned her surviving children together, speaking gently yet powerfully, voice trembling emotionally. "If I go, promise me never to abandon your lost brothers and sisters. Our love must remain stronger than Fayetteville's silence. Fight bravely for justice, always." Her children embraced tearfully, promising solemnly never to forget or surrender. Shortly afterward, Jennie passed peacefully, leaving behind profound grief yet powerful inspiration, her life a testament to courage, determination, and unyielding love. Following Jennie's passing, Fayetteville breathed cautiously, believing wrongly the tragedy might finally fade quietly into history. But Jennie's surviving children fulfilled faithfully their solemn promises, continuing defiantly their parents' lifelong quest for justice, truth, and resolution. They maintained the billboard proudly, confronting Fayetteville daily with uncomfortable memories. They spoke openly to new generations, sharing stories of bravery, courage, and relentless searching. Their parents' meticulously documented archive became essential evidence, carefully preserved, awaiting future opportunities to finally confront Fayetteville's powerful conspiracy openly and decisively. Decades later, Fayetteville remained deeply haunted, not merely by paranormal events continually reported around the Sodder property, but by deeper shadows of unresolved guilt and fear. Residents privately acknowledged lingering unease, aware truths hidden beneath careful silence threatened eventually to surface, confronting Fayetteville painfully with its past once more. Modern-day visitors arrived regularly, drawn curiously by stories widely circulated online. True crime enthusiasts, paranormal researchers, journalists investigating Fayetteville's lingering mysteries. Many documented chilling experiences at the property, unexplained apparitions, voices captured clearly through recordings, messages softly pleading, "Don't forget us, find us." Paranormal investigators consistently concluded something genuinely inexplicable lingered around the Sodder ruins. Restless spirits seeking justice, truth, and peace denied them tragically decades earlier. These accounts, widely publicized, continually renewed interest in Fayetteville's dark secrets, refusing to allow memories to fade quietly into oblivion. Increasingly, Fayetteville faced uncomfortable media scrutiny, forced repeatedly to revisit its painful past publicly. Yet silence remained stubborn, authorities continually resisting pressure for official investigations. Each new inquiry vanished abruptly, blocked mysteriously by unseen influences determined to protect Fayetteville's darkest truths permanently. Yet each passing year deepened Fayetteville's unease profoundly. Residents privately admitted fears that unresolved guilt might haunt the community forever. An eternal shadow cast deliberately by powerful figures intent upon silence and secrecy at all costs. George and Jennie's surviving descendants understood clearly their responsibility to preserve memory courageously, ensuring truths remained alive despite relentless silence and obstruction. Each generation maintained faithfully their family's legacy, continually confronting Fayetteville bravely with questions unanswered and justice denied. Their persistence profoundly inspired broader public support, attracting widespread admiration nationwide. Documentaries, articles, podcasts, each revisited Fayetteville's mystery regularly, refusing to let silence erase memories permanently. Interest continually rekindled demands for renewed investigations, pressure building relentlessly upon authorities unwilling to confront uncomfortable truths openly. Yet powerful resistance continually prevailed. Conspirators determined Fayetteville's darkest secrets remained permanently hidden beneath layers of fear, money, influence, and silence. Still, hope persisted powerfully. Each carefully preserved photograph, each documented witness statement, each haunting audio recording represented powerful evidence, awaiting someday a breakthrough finally capable of confronting conspirators openly, decisively, and bravely. George and Jennie's courage had profoundly transformed tragedy into powerful inspiration, teaching generations lessons of bravery, determination, and unyielding love, stronger than silence, shadows, and secrecy. Their story resonated deeply, reminding everyone that truths hidden deliberately might never remain buried permanently, inevitably surfacing someday to confront conspirators bravely with justice, accountability, and resolution. Over the decades, Fayetteville had desperately tried to move beyond its dark legacy, to bury painful memories beneath layers of silence and secrecy. Yet the story of the vanished Sodder children refused to disappear quietly. Like restless spirits themselves, these unanswered questions continually resurfaced, haunting new generations who confronted Fayetteville's carefully maintained silence with renewed courage and determination. Today, nothing remains of the original Sodder home but scattered ruins overgrown by weeds and shadows. Yet visitors frequently report inexplicable experiences there. Echoes of children's laughter drifting softly through twilight. Ghostly figures glimpsed briefly beneath moonlight. Soft whispers gently pleading for remembrance and justice. Each experience deepens Fayetteville's uneasy realization that its past refuses to remain buried permanently. George and Jennie's descendants, honoring solemn promises, continue tirelessly documenting each new report, meticulously preserving every scrap of evidence. Their family archive grows continually, a powerful testament to decades of relentless courage, love, and unyielding determination. Each new generation accepts responsibility willingly, understanding their fight transcends personal tragedy, symbolizing broader battles against silence, injustice, and fear everywhere. Nationally, the story endures powerfully through podcasts, documentaries, articles, and investigative reports continually revisiting Fayetteville's lingering mysteries. Interest regularly rekindles public pressure demanding new investigations, refusing to allow powerful conspirators to permanently silence truths hidden deliberately decades earlier. Yet despite immense challenges, George and Jennie's family remain profoundly hopeful, inspired continually by their ancestors' courageous legacy. They believe deeply that someday powerful breakthroughs will finally confront Fayetteville openly and decisively with truths long denied, forcing accountability and justice despite decades of stubborn obstruction. Meanwhile, Fayetteville continues, quietly enduring shadows cast deliberately by conspirators determined to protect their darkest secrets permanently. Yet beneath superficial silence, profound unease grows continually. Residents privately acknowledging fears that unresolved guilt may haunt their community forever unless truths finally surface openly, allowing genuine healing and peace. Ultimately, the vanished Sodder children symbolize much more than personal tragedy. They embody powerful reminders that secrets hidden deliberately inevitably resurface someday, confronting conspirators courageously with uncomfortable truths, justice, and accountability. George and Jennie's lifelong fight profoundly demonstrates how unwavering love, courage, and determination can challenge powerful conspiracies and silence, inspiring future generations profoundly toward bravery, truth, and justice. Though decades passed without resolution, George and Jennie's legacy remains powerfully alive, continually confronting silence, secrecy, and injustice everywhere. Their family's courage profoundly inspires countless others fighting similar battles, ensuring truths hidden deliberately never remain buried permanently. And so, beneath shadows of unresolved mystery, Fayetteville waits patiently, knowing someday powerful breakthroughs will finally confront conspirators openly, decisively, and bravely, delivering justice decades overdue. Conclusion. Tonight, as you reflect upon the tragic mystery of the Sodder children, ask yourself this: can silence ever truly bury truth forever? Or do secrets inevitably resurface, confronting those responsible courageously with justice, accountability, and resolution? The vanished Sodder children await still, lost but never forgotten, symbolizing profound struggles against silence, secrecy, and injustice everywhere. Thank you for joining us on this haunting journey. If you've been moved by this powerful true story and believe passionately in justice, truth, and accountability, we invite you to subscribe to our channel. Click the notification bell so you never miss another chilling true crime story. Your support ensures these powerful stories endure, confronting silence and secrecy bravely, inspiring future generations profoundly toward courage, justice, and Truth, together let's keep fighting, until every hidden truth finally emerges courageously into the light.